Hello. Okay, I'm here to talk about more meta decks that are happening right now. So I am hard stuck in Platinum. It has been really rough. There are so many decks going right now. But I gathered three of some of the more impressive ones that I'm coming across and seeing on a lot of tier lists, and I'm just gonna get into and go over them. So the first one I want to look at is Mono Red Aggro. So we have talked about this red deck wins type of deck before. But there's a couple things that are new since Brothers War that make this deck even more potent than it was. So this is an aggro deck. It runs creatures and burn spells, as per usual with the mono red. Okay, first card. The Monastery Swift Spear. So this is a new card with Brothers War. It's a 1 cost 1/2 haste with prowess, and prowess just means that whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So with all the burn spells that are in this deck, it gets buffed up quite a bit. And it has haste. They can start slamming these down with other cards and just attack you for a lot. Um, so next is End the Festivities. So this is a non-creature spell, so this will buff the Monastery Swift Spear. I was actually surprised to see this in a lot of the deck lists as like something that they take four of. So this card deals 1 damage to each opponent, each creature, and planeswalker they control. As far as planeswalkers go, Liliana of the Veil is one that is often sitting at one loyalty counter. If you play her and then target player sacrifice a creature, she sits at one loyalty counter. So this works really well to get rid of her. And it also works well against the soldier decks, which have been quite popular. We talked about those last week. But with this new card, another Brothers War card, Mechanized Warfare, this gets better. Both of these cards get better. So it's a 3 cost enchantment. If a red or artifact source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much +1. So this haste 1/2 becomes like a haste 2/2 basically, plus whatever buffs it gets, right? And then End the Festivities does 2 damage to each opponent and each creature and each planeswalker. So when you're able to spend 1 mana to do 2 damage to everything on the board, including the enemy player, that is pretty good. That is value. So this Mechanized Warfare really amps up these other spells. Okay, what else goes with this? Oh, Reckless Impulse. So Reckless Impulse is basically the card to like keep this deck going for just a little longer. So these really aggressive decks tend to play absolutely everything in their hand by turn 4, and they're kind of top decking after turn 4. So if they don't have you by turn 4, it's looking kind of grim. Turn 4 is usually when you can start get good blockers out, get removal down, get good planeswalkers out, gain life in some way. So this deck is really pressured to get you down. And this Reckless Impulse is kind of their hold it till you've played everything else and play this to get a couple more cards. So it's a sorcery and it says exile the top 2 cards of your library until the end of your next turn and you may play those cards. Another bunch of spells that I want to go over, just because we know that the monk likes to be buffed up by spells, and every mono red deck is definitely going to run these, is the lightning strike and the play with fire. So remember, both of these cards are going to be amped up by the Mechanized Warfare. So this will instead do 3 damage. Lightning Strike will do 4 damage, which is incredibly good. 4 damage to either the player's face or to a blocking creature that might be a problem. That feels really good. And hitting those off the Reckless Impulse would be like extremely nice to do. You do get to play these either on the current turn or the next turn. So if you don't have the mana to play everything on the first turn, like it's not a problem, which is what makes this so good. Also, the mono red always wants to play everything, so it's not like you're going to hit a card that you wouldn't necessarily want to play. You're likely to want to play everything. You can put multiple Mechanized Warfares down, and they do all trigger. So hitting one of those when you already have one down is good too. Okay, and then the last up, I have Chandra. So there are a couple other creatures, like there is the Phoenix chick and stuff. Some people run the Stormkeeper, which is the 2/3 haste that gives somebody else haste. There are a couple other creatures and spells that are running here, but I just thought these were kind of interesting. And then Chandra's the last one I want to look at. So she's a 3 cost, which is so great because this deck runs very low mana. I think they run 20 mana, which is extremely low. Like you're gonna hit 3 or 4 the whole game. basically. But she runs 3 and she can add 1 mana and she deals 1 damage to up to 1 target player or planeswalker. So again, this is buffed up by the mechanized warfare, so that's 2 damage straight to their face or to a planeswalker. The other +1 is to exile the top of your library, and if it's red, you can cast it this turn. So it's not quite the same as the Reckless Impulse, because you don't have the next turn as well to play it, but since you didn't have to spend mana to trigger that, you're likely to be able to play everything you hit, which is going to be great. And then the -7, which is just like not really going to be hit in the mono red deck. They're usually like way faster than that. But in the event that it does, you get to exile top 5 cards of your library. You may cast red spells from among them this turn. You get an emblem that says, whenever you cast a red spell, this emblem deals X damage to any target, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast the spell. So that X damage done is also amplified by mechanized warfare. So if you hit something like a lightning strike off that, you get to do 4 damage from the lightning strike, and then you get to do another 3 damage because of the mana's 2 plus the 1 for mechanized warfare if you have that down. So you could definitely see how this deck can rip through opponents with just raw damage if given the opportunity. Okay, so what's the strategy? Well, the strategy is to cast absolutely everything. Everything you draw here is going to help you in some way. You definitely want to buff up this Swift Spear, maybe even attack it raw as a 1/2, and then cast all your instances and sorceries, like your Play with Fires and your Lightning Strikes. As you're attacking to buff this up, like that's definitely the way to do it. Just get as much damage through as possible, as soon as possible. And then what are the counters? Well, the counters to mono red aggro are always removal and life gain. So removing these hasty creatures that are getting buffed, or gaining life, even gaining 3 life in the early game could be enough to slow this deck down. I've definitely had games where they have plenty of damage and I would have had to gain 10 life to hold on, but the deck doesn't always run that perfectly right. So any life gain that you can manage will potentially slow this deck down enough to let you hold on. I played this deck today, maybe an hour ago on my stream, and they had me at 7 life on turn 3 and like super dead. Like there was no hope for me. Like they did extra damage on turn 4. And I was playing removal. I was playing mono black, and so I had removal. I didn't really have the life gain there because I didn't hit the graveyard. I didn't hit the shield dread. But yeah, it was spooky how fast that deck was. Okay, so that was mono red aggro. Next, we'll look at Orzhov Control. We've been looking at all kinds of different control. They always seem to be the same colors, or red, black, white, or blue, or some combination thereof. But Orzhov is not one that we have talked about, so I want to take a look at it. I also have seen variations of Orzhov Control like multiple times today, so it's definitely a deck that's around. So this is a control deck or a mid-range deck, and it has a lot of the same cards. We're going to recognize these cards. So the cards are removal and draw. Okay, first one, Wandering Emperor. So this is a staple in a lot of white decks. Anything running white wants to run this card because it's insanely good. So she's a legendary planeswalker that has flash. And as long as you have played her this turn, you can activate her loyalty counters at instant speed, which means you can just like flash her in and do one of these things. So the options are to put a 1/1 counter on a target creature and it gains first strike. This is excellent for buffing up a creature that is blocking to give it first strike so it won't necessarily die. So it's kind of like a surprise blocker. The other option is to create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with vigilance. That's only -1. And then the ultimate, which is only -2, is to exile a target tapped creature and gain 2 life. So the gaining 2 life is so good. We talked about how it actually destroys the mono red if you gain life at all, and exiling their creatures and gaining life. Like that's fantastic. But this card is actually most commonly used as a win condition in this deck, so they are more likely, unless they really have to get rid of something, they're really more likely to just create 2/2s, give them a counter, create another 2/2s, give it a counter, and just start having these 3/3s all over the board. These 2/2 samurais are vigilance, so they serve as great blockers and attackers, so a very, very strong card for 4 mana. Comes in as removal, also gives you an army. Okay, next, Archangel of Wrath. So this version of the Orzhov Control that I was looking at, which is the one that had the highest win rate on some of the sites that I referenced, actually splashes in red to be able to kick this card. So they just used dual lands that were white, black, and red. So this really should be a Mardu control, but this is the only red in the deck. And we're actually going to look at a Mardu mid-range next. So we'll see like other uses of this card, the interactions with it. But this is a 4-cost 3/4 flying lifelink angel. So good. Flying and lifelink, just as fantastic combo because it's very hard to block. Also, 4 toughness is great toughness. There's not a ton of cards out there that are flying that can do 4 damage. And then you could kick it for 1 black, 1 red. You kick it twice, basically. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, deal 2 damage to a target, and if it was kicked again, do 2 damage to a target. So you can come in for 6 mana and do 4 damage when it comes in. So something to note is that she has lifelink, and this says she does the damage. So that 2 or 4 damage that you're kicking into actually heals you as well. So that is why this is such a good card in a control deck. It gives you a blocker, it gives you an attacker, which could win you the game, also heals if you're low. It just does so much for you. And very hard card to deal with if you don't have a blocker in the air or spot removal right then and there, right? Because the life gain that they can get from this can really put you back. Okay, this card. Oh, anybody who's played against this card hates this card. It is a 6 mana cost, but they can choose one or more. So they can choose all or none or some of these. And that is to exile artifacts, exile all creatures, exile all enchantments, or exile all graveyards. So artifacts and enchantments, great. Creatures, great. Graveyards, excellent too, because so many people interact with the graveyard or reanimate cards from the graveyard, and exiling all of that, it's gone. Tenacious Underdogs, Sarah Paragons, just some of the cards that interact with the graveyard, and they can't do that anymore. Also, this does not hit planeswalkers, so running planeswalkers, you kind of are saved by that. You do have to find a way to remove enemy planeswalkers, but being able to wipe their board of everything else, especially since this is a control deck that is basically holding out to play these 4, 5, 6 drops later on, you basically hold your Archangel Wrath until you farewell and clear their board and make sure they don't have too many cards, and then you can play this, start to gain life and do damage. But playing her earlier is also an option. You just don't want to get her farewelled. But great removal. Okay, so other removal that this deck can run is the Destroy Evil, which lets you destroy an enchantment or a creature with 4 greater. So this is just stall tactic, right? Anything that they're not quite at the board wipe yet, but something is big and scary and doing too much damage to them early on, you can just get it out of there. Enchantments that give you tokens, get them out of there. Infernal Grasp also. A lot of people are running either Infernal Grasp or Go for the Throat. Go for the Throat does not work on artifacts, so if you're doing that, you may need to throw in a Braid or something in here to be able to get rid of artifacts. But you do have lots of ways to gain life. Both the Wanderer Emperor and the Archangel of Wrath can gain life, so losing 2 life isn't necessarily the worst. I'm just going to leave Farewell up there. Oh, there's another one. Okay, sorry. Soul Transfer. So this is the answer for Planeswalkers. Exile Turret, it's a sorcery, and you can choose one or both. If you have both an enchantment and artifact, you can have both. But most cases, you only ever choose one. I don't think there are artifacts in this deck, so this is basically only run to exile target creature or planeswalker, or to return a creature or a planeswalker from the graveyard. So they're definitely going to be using that to pull these out if they are using that second one. But this is going to be your answer for planeswalkers otherwise. Okay, wedding announcement. So I have a wedding announcement in here, which, oh, sorry, I have this in the draw column. I knew I had something important I wanted to say before I got into these. So this is basically the removal stuff we looked at here, and this is draw. So wedding announcement isn't necessarily always draw. Like when you first get this out, you're just going to get the 1/1s. You have to attack with 2 creatures on your turn in order to get the draw trigger. There aren't any really, I don't think there are any other early game creatures that are run in this deck. So the first wedding announcement that's going to go out is going to be for creatures that are just going to be blockers or just building up some creatures for the draw trigger. This deck runs 4 wedding announcements though. So the other wedding announcements are likely all going to be triggered for draw. You're going to try to trigger as much draw as possible with these cards because you want to hit all that removal and these win conditions at the right time. So wedding announcements in the draw column because I think that is the most common use of it in this deck. Bankbuster, the Reckoner Bankbuster, serves the same purpose basically. So this will come in with 3 charge counters on it. You can pay 2 mana to remove a charge counter and draw a card. Once you remove all 3 of those counters, it creates a 1/1 creature that can actually pilot this. So this is going to mainly be in here. There are 3 of them, I believe, are run in this main deck, maybe even 4 in some of the builds. It is going to be in here for draw, and then later it is an attacker. But the main goal here is to just draw into these other cards here. Oh, and then the Linddss. This is another card that's going to be in here for draw. So this card's a 3 mana artifact. Wait, there is an artifact in here. So this will actually help you trigger that soul transfer we talked about. So if you control an artifact and an enchantment, which the wedding announcement would be an enchantment and this would be an artifact. So you could potentially trigger both of these soul transfers, which is pretty good. Okay, so Celestis, it's neither night or day. It becomes day as this enters the battlefield. You can add 1 mana of any color. So getting this out on turn 3 it means they can get a farewell out on turn 5. So you do need to be aware of that farewell, getting rid of absolutely everything. And then for 3 mana, you can switch it, and if every time it switches, you can gain a life and draw a card. If you do draw a card, you have to discard. But this is literally in here for the cycle ability and the little bit of life gain. Also, it helps switch those cards from night to day that are more important when they're more potent when they're in one form or the other. This can kind of help you with those cards if you need to. I think the majority of the use cases for this are going to be just to cycle cards and gain life. Okay, and then the last column here. So we have the removal column, the draw column, and then this column does both. There's only an evoke despair in this column. But for 5 mana, so that's a lot of black. And we are running a lot of white as well. Like these cards all need 2 white. But I did take a look at some of the mana in the builds, and they all run all black. Every single dual land has black in it, and I think that is specifically to be able to hit these Evoke Despairs on turn 5, maybe on turn 4 if you have the Celestis out early, to get you the removal and the draw. So this is a big player in this deck. What this card does is it has target opponent sacrifice a creature. If they can't, they lose 2 life and you draw a card, and then repeat this process for enchantment and planeswalker. So this is a 5 cost card that can remove a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker. And if they don't have any of those things, you get to draw a card. So it serves as draw and as removal. It's fantastic. Okay, so what's the strategy of this deck? Oh, I had that backwards. The strategy of the deck is to remove stuff until you hit your win conditions, which are the Emperor and the Angel of Wrath. These are definitely going to be building up an army with the Emperor and slamming down these 6-cost Archangels to heal and be able to swing with 3 in the air. And Evoke Despairs are also going to do damage once the board is cleared as well. They can do 6 damage if they have nothing to sacrifice. So these are the win conditions that are going to get them there. And everything else in the deck basically serves as stall tactics and removal so that you can't be a threat to them. Okay, and the counters are going to be control. I always think that control versus control is always an interesting matchup. Different control decks have different strengths and weaknesses, and they tend to do well into each other because they're both hitting the mid game or their peak around the same time at the mid game. So definitely control is going to be good into control, and then also super aggro, specifically the mono red I mentioned here. Just because this deck doesn't have a lot of early removal. It has a little bit of early spot removal, but it's not hitting a board wipe until turn 5 at the earliest. And turn 5 is usually the mono red is like already lethal. So they're also not able to gain life early. The Wanderer would be the earliest time to gain life. So I definitely think a super aggro deck can just roll over this deck before it gets the right cards at the right time. It's looking to just slowly stall and hold on. So I definitely think that could work. Okay, so that was Orzhov Control. We're gonna look at Mardu Control, which is not that different from Orzhov. It runs the red similarly, but it runs a little bit more red cards, and they're all really good. So we're going to look at this. This is another control or mid-range deck. And whenever I'm talking about any of these red mid-range decks, I always refer to the cards as utility. I'm basically talking about Kiki, Jiki. We can actually pull her up here. So the Fable of the Mirror Breaker, which is a saga. So this saga can give you a creature that can create you mana tokens or treasure tokens that you can tap for mana. You can also discard cards and draw cards, so it gives you the ability to cycle through your cards. And then it comes in as a Goblin Shaman 2/2 that can create a token that's a copy of another non-legendary creature you control. It gains haste, and you have to sacrifice at the end of turn. But all of the enter battlefield or mechanics on the cards stay. And so because of that, this card is just like the master of utility. Copying things is always fantastic. Some of the candidates for copy would be like the Blood Tithe Harvester. We've definitely talked about this before, but 3/2 for 2. It comes in and it makes a blood token, then you could sacrifice it to give something -X, where X is double the amount of blood tokens you have. So copying these with Kiki is creating those blood tokens every time you copy them, and then you just sacrifice the copy and get to minus something off the board. So that's fantastic. Another contender would be the Graveyard Trespasser. So this is just a 3/3, so you can use it to attack, but you can also exile things out of the graveyard every time this enters. And if you hit a creature, you get to gain a life, and opponent loses a life. Also, if it's nighttime, which you can trigger with your Celestis, if you wanted to run that in here, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. It was run in the last deck we looked at, which is very similar. Then you can turn those into 4/4s, the copies. So that's cool too. Yeah, so Kiki's insane, and hitting all kinds of copies is great. So those are just some casual copies. These are big time copies. Okay, so Archangel of Wrath, we saw that in the other deck. She's here again, and this is a Mardu, so it runs white, black, red. It is always going to have the mana for this, and you want to cast it for that because again, the lifelink is so good and the raw damage through. You can copy her with Kiki because she is not legendary. She does not get the kicker when she comes in from Kiki, but she is still a 3/4 flying lifelink. So you're getting a ton of life and pulling out a 3/4 every single turn. If you don't have anything better to copy, it's fantastic. And gaining all that life is going to put your opponent way behind. Okay, and then Sarah Paragon. So Sarah Paragon is a 4-cost 3/4 flyer. Once during each of your turns, you can bring something from the graveyard back to the battlefield. You have to spend its mana cost. The mana value has to be 3 or less. So this doesn't work on Archangel of Wrath, but it does work on Kiki, or the enchantment that the Kiki turns comes from. Also works on that Harvester. Also works on the Graveyard Trespasser. Those other creatures we looked at. So bringing those all back again is kind of annoying. Also, you can copy the ones that have been brought back. So again, Kiki getting more use. And she's also a 3/4 flyer, which we talked about how flying is just hard to deal with. They need to spot remove that, and the fact that you're reanimating stuff is very good. This reanimation is an example of why people run the Farewell, where they just exile everything out of the graveyards because they don't want that interaction to happen. So Sarah is definitely one of those people that suffer from that trigger. Oh, so I threw a Steel Seraph in here because we're talking about this on my stream, and this card is insanely good, and it fits in here. Not every build was running it, but some of them were. So this is a 6-cost 5/4 flyer, but you can prototype it for 3, which is just 2 white, and that's no problem because you are running other cards with 2 white, so you're going to make sure you have the white mana available. It comes in as a 3/3. What makes it so good, though, is at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gains your choice of flying, vigilance, or lifelink until end of turn. So you can give something like the Archangel of Wrath vigilance. You can give those copies that you're creating and you don't care about, give them lifelink to gain more life. Vigilance, flying, and other things have flying, but even honestly, you could give your Graveyard Trespass flying, potentially hit 4/4 flying. And it itself is a flyer. So I just think that's a fantastic card. Okay, next we're Shieldred. This card's insanely good. It's also in the other deck we talked about. It's in every deck that's running black, honestly. It's just like one of the best cards, if not the best card in the game. So she cannot be copied from Kiki because she is legendary. But for 4 cost, she's a 4/5 death touch. Whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life, which is insanely good. The thing that makes this so good too is it goes really well with these other cards because Kiki Jiki, Archangel of Wrath, and Sarah Paragon are all problems. And so every once in a while, I find myself in a position where I need to remove the shield and I'm going to die to her, but I need to remove the Sarah Paragon before he brings everything back. I need to remove the Archangel Wrath so he stops gaining life. Like, I don't have all these removal cards that I need. So sometimes she ends up staying out longer than she should, and you get a lot of value from that just because every card in this deck is something people have to deal with. Okay, and then I think I just have a bunch of removal over here. These are the control cards here at the end. So the Rite of Oblivion, or utility cards, we'll call them. This deck loves utility. So Rite of Oblivion is a 2-cost sorcery. At additional cost to cast a spell, you have to sacrifice a non-land permanent. So the Kiki copies are a good one for that. Those blood tokens that are created from the Harvester, you could use those. And you can also flash this back, so you can do it again, but you have to pay 4 mana for the second time. So another thing you can sacrifice is actually we have a wedding announcement in here, and they create those 1/1 white human creature tokens. So those are also good candidates to use the Rite of Oblivion on, because sacrificing the 1/1 creature is like whatever, no problem. And then Wedding Announcement is another great utility card because it gives you those 1/1s. It also eventually gives everything +1/+1. So then this becomes a 4/5. This becomes a 5/6. Your copies come in and they're all get +1/+1. And then if you ever attack with 2 or more before it flips, you get to draw. So this gives you draw, it gives you creatures, and it buffs all your creatures. So it's just a great card. Okay, and then Legion to Ashes. Usually people are only running one of these, but let's take a look at why. So this exiles non-land permanent and opponent controls, and all tokens that player controls with the same name as that permanent. So what I think is that this is in here for the soldier decks. The Myral, we talked about her last week. She creates a ton of 1/1 soldiers, like a ton. Like she has swung and created like 8 at once. So having a way to get rid of them, we did have that end of festivities that the mono red was running, but this is another option as well. So you can exile all soldier tokens. And if you're not playing against a soldier deck, this card is still good because you can just straight up exile target non-land permanent. And whatever, if there's no tokens that are the same name of it, you don't really care because you still get a 3-cost exile. And then Go for the Throat. So we've been talking about this. Infernal Grasp, Go for the Throat. People are running different amounts of different of them. You do have life gain in here, so running the Infernal Grasp is not a problem, but because there's so much red in this deck, running Abrades. So Abrade is do 3 damage to target player or destroy target artifact. So that Abrade will actually cover the fact that you can't get non-artifacts with this. Okay, so the strategy of this deck is removal and utility with Kiki. Lots of utility in here. With the wedding announcement, with the copies for Kiki, bringing things back with Sarah Paragon, you just have a lot that you can do. And then kill with flying, just because these flyers are so hard to deal with. They basically need removal for them, or other flyers, which isn't that common. There are a ton of flyers that can block something with 3 or 4 power, depending on if this is buffed from anywhere else. So that's definitely how they're going to get you, if not from Shieldred. And then the counters. So the counters is control and removal. As I said before, I always think control is good into control, just because they hit the curve around the same time. They have similar tempo, we could say, so they'll always have a better chance against each other. And then have aggro sometimes. So I think this deck is actually a little bit better at slowing down aggression, just because it is casting some really good stuff on turn 2 and 3, specifically basically the Harvester and the Graveyard Trespasser, and then hitting like the Sarah Paragon on turn 4. If they went lost anything, they reanimate. Like basically with 3 or 4 cards, you can play them all twice by turn 4. So you are sometimes often in a better spot against aggro than the other deck would be, just because it's trying to hold out for a little bit later of a game. Uh, So aggro not so good into this one, but definitely control could fight for a spot against Mardu Control. So, yeah, that's it. I will definitely have to take a look at some more decks. The meta seems to be shaking up a little bit. I saw a ton of soldier decks before, and I was actually gonna do mono white soldiers here, which is just like very similar to the Azurius soldiers that we looked at last week. But I don't think the soldiers are doing as well. I'm seeing a lot less of them. They're falling down on the meta list. So we opted to talk about some of the control decks that are coming out because that seems to be where the meta is heading. But we don't know. We'll have to see what else is good next week. All right, thanks.